Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are just waiting for a few more seconds for everyone to come on board. And I do apologize for the unusual background and possibly the sound quality. I had to make technical switches on the very last moment. But it's nonetheless a great pleasure to welcome you all, ladies and gentlemen, to the special DGAP morning briefing on the outcome of the COP29 climate summit, which ended on Sunday very, very early in the morning. I'm Henning Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik Quarterly. As always, the negotiations at the Conference of Parties, or COP, of the UNFCCC, or the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, dragged on for longer than the envisioned deadline on Friday. By the early hours of Sunday, however, there was a deal in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, yet another petrostate, to host COP. At the core of this is a tripling of the flow of money to help developing countries adopt cleaner energy and cope with the effects of climate change. Under the deal, wealthy nations pledged to reach $300 billion per year in support by 2035, up from a current target of $100 billion. Experts, however, have placed the need for developing countries much higher at $1.3 trillion per year. That is the amount that must be invested in the energy transition of lower-income countries, in addition to what those countries already spend to keep the planet's average temperature rise under 1.5 degrees Celsius. The agreement struck in Baku calls on private companies and international lenders like the World Bank to cover the missing $1 trillion. This was seen by some as a kind of escape clause for the rich countries and immediately criticized. Chandni Raina, the representative from India, called the $300 billion a paltry sum, adding, "I'm sorry to say that we cannot accept it. We seek a much higher ambition from the developed countries." She also called the agreement nothing more than an optical illusion. Speakers from other developing countries echoed these comments. And what's more, this year's COP was overshadowed by the election victory of Donald Trump in the US presidential race, who was widely expected not to honor the agreement reached in Baku. And he's also threatened he would withdraw the United States from the 2015 Paris Agreement. To discuss the outcome of COP and what lies ahead, I have the pleasure of welcoming three experts this morning. In order of appearance, we'll be first hearing from Dr. Anna Lührmann, the Minister of State for Europe and Climate at the German Foreign Office and a member of the Greens. Anna Lührmann has combined her political career with an academic one, with a focus on strengthening democracy. She first entered the Bundestag at the age of 19 in 2002, at that time the youngest ever German MP. She has been in her present role since December 2021, and as all our panelists, I believe, I couldn't check before we started, attended COP29. Welcome, Anna Lührmann.
Hello, good morning. Yes, indeed.
Sorry.
Yes, do you want me to start already, or do you want to?
No, I go through the panel and then,
okay, perfect.
Then we start. Also with us is Sabine Minninger, who is a Senior Policy Advisor for Brot for die Welt, the globally active development and relief agency of the Protestant churches in Germany. She has been in her present role since 2012, but has been following the UNFCCC process already since 2008, working with partners from the so-called Global South for climate justice, especially for the most vulnerable groups. Welcome, Sabine Minninger. And last but not least, I've got the pleasure of welcoming my DGAP colleague, Dr. Kira Finke, who is the head of the Center for Climate and Foreign Policy here at the German Council on Foreign Relations. She is also co-chair of the advisory board to the German federal government on civil crisis prevention and peace building. Kira has won great recognition for her research work and also for her book Sturmnomaden, which was published in 2022. Welcome, Kira. Some quick housekeeping remarks. To start us off, our panelists will present their 5-minute inputs on their reading of the COP outcome. After some discussion on the panel, about 30 minutes in, we will be opening up for your questions and comments. For the Q&A, please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and put your question in person to the panel. You're also welcome to submit questions and comments via the chat function. Please note that this briefing will be recorded and that will have to close on time at 9:30 a.m. And with a word of thanks to my DGAP colleagues, Jan Stöckmann, Milan Nitsch, Julia Lueva, Wiebke Evering, Helga Beck, and many more, who all helped to keep these briefings running. Let's start now with Minister of State Lührmann, please.
Yeah, good morning again from my side. Yeah, as expected, the COP29 was one of the toughest since Paris. We have seen a lot of geopolitical divides, and international climate finance and also mitigation has become highly politicized. But I think, and this is in these days and times worthwhile noting, UNFCCC and the international climate order, multilateralism as such, still works. We at least demonstrated some unity for a livable future as sort of world community. And I think in this day and age, this is really cannot be underestimated. The concrete results, however, we see some light and also shadow when it comes to mitigation, which was one of our focus issues, of course. Here we only see a very minor step forward, and we find the results quite disappointing. We could prevent a deal to the detriment of the most vulnerable countries, especially those now already suffering extreme droughts and floods. What we did indeed, and I think that's there's quite some light here, we opened a new chapter in climate finance with a new approach to scaling up climate finance for developing countries. We agreed on this new financing goal until 2035 with a broadened donor base. And this is a paradigm shift, and I'm sure we'll discuss about this, but I think this is a good sign because in the end we need to mobilize as many funds as possible. The commitment now is at least $300 billion a year until 2035 for climate finance for developing countries, and also it notes in the conclusions that we need to work towards a vision of scaling up climate finance for developing countries to 1.3 trillion by 2035. So at least there's the note of this goal as well. It is realistic if all financial actors really get behind it. The broader range of public donors, but also private donors or private financiers. And here we need a roadmap from Baku to Belém, so to next year, which will be developed now. We achieved this agreement by negotiating until the very end, building bridges across continents. And I attended COP only in the first week, but in the second week, Jennifer Morgan, of course, but also Minister Baerbock was there, really negotiating a lot, building trust and confidence and building bridges across continents, very intense discussions with China, Brazil, UK, US, but also regions spanning alliances with progressive and vulnerable developing countries. I think that was a good sign. A very strong Team Europe working closely together. Trusted relations with UNFCCC were very helpful. And the crucial thing is now that wealthy emitters can now contribute to this financial goal, the NCQG. This has a historical relevance, and it will increase pressure on countries from the Gulf region and China to also contribute financially now. And the private sector is being given a stronger role. Public funds will not be enough. We need to really mobilize also the private funds. And more than half will come from multilateral development banks, which is also crucial for success given the tight public budgets. The quality of climate finance is also enhanced, easier access, increase of adaptation finance, which unfortunately becomes more and more relevant. and a better framework conditions for implementation. However, these 300 billion per year can only be a starting point. As Annalena Baerbock put it Sunday night, we really did not forget about our historical responsibility. We will deliver. And climate finance and mitigation cannot be separated. Money alone will not get us on this 1.5 degree path. Therefore, it's also good that the COP30 in Belém will focus on the NDCs. And it's really encouraging that now solid rules for carbon markets are adopted. These mechanisms can be used. And the language on gender remained. The work on the gender program was extended for 10 years, despite a lot of resistance from actors like the Vatican. And the third UNFCCC Gender Action Plan will happen next year. So just to sum up, my impression of this when I attended last week or in the first week, it was really already there a mood between hope and despair, because it was really drastic that everyone I spoke to already shared stories about effects of the climate crisis, devastating effects, floods in places where floods had never taken place before, the storms and floods in Spain, of course. Pedro Sanchez was there. The melting of glaciers that threatens water security in the Himalayan. I spoke to some people from that region there. So it's really, different maybe also to prior COPs. It was very much clear that the climate crisis is something that is here already and that needs to be urgently addressed. And most hope I actually took away from Baku came from conversations with industry actors, because the decarbonization is in full swing. They are on this direction. And I think that will also something that carries us maybe even through this bumpy road that where we might be in now, also in the years to come. We have also some concrete examples of very hopeful pledges and determination in this regard. At COP, we have a no new coal pledge. We have a grids and storage pledge. We have had the climate club meeting, where also it's all about the decarbonization of heavy industries. And the global shift to renewables and the drop in demand for fossil fuels is something that's happening, and that's not gonna stop. We really need to stay on course now. That's, I think, for the way forward. We really need to pick up speed in the negotiations in the run-up of COP30 now. We have the Petersburg Climate Dialogue and meetings in Bonn, of course, coming up. We will work very hard to make the concerns of vulnerable and smaller island states and smaller states especially heard. And we will continue to demonstrate that Germany is a trustworthy partner, regardless of some new elections or these kind of things. And also the EU has demonstrated again that we stand behind this goal of being the first climate neutral continent. So that was my report, and looking forward to the impression of others and also to the discussion.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive assessment of what has been achieved. So it's not all bad, I take it. Let's move on now to Sabine Minninger, please.
Thank you so much for giving me the word. And, Bread for the World is a development organization. We are working very closely with least developed countries and with small island development states, and supporting their positions and also the civil society positions from this region, so the poorest and most vulnerable. And I can also echo some of the points that Anna Lührmann made, and I'd like to distinguish one thing now. There's once the role of the delegation in this COP, and I must say that they are really leading and they enjoy the trust in all delegations. And clearly they played a very positive role, especially Annalena Baerbock in the last 12 hours. They were very crucial that she was there, and that was she avoided the failure of this COP. That's very clear. But then there's another role, and that's of the entire government, because the delegation can only be as good as the mandate as they get from back home and the backing that they get from back home. And to be honest, that was a very bad atmosphere that Germany created in the forehand, or at least they brought nothing to build trust from the beginning. The dissolvement of the traffic light government, and even not knowing if they can keep the old promises of climate finance they have pledged of 6 billion euro a year from the year 2025. They were not very helpful. I just want to remember that before we went to the Paris negotiations that were in December 2015, Angela Merkel made a pledge half a year before to the Green Climate Fund, and she promised that she will double climate finance of Germany. And that is mainly, that is grants based and not loans. And that she will double it from, at the time was 2 billion to 4 billion. So, and then she put a lot of pressure of other countries to follow her example. So we had already clear numbers on the table before we went to Paris. And that created a very good atmosphere, a trust-building atmosphere. This time, Germany came there not knowing if they can keep their old promises. Thanks God, this government got dissolved a couple of days before or in between, and then at least they could say, okay, we keep our old promises, but they were not able to create like a great atmosphere from the beginning that would push others to follow their leading example. So the leading role of Germany was missing, and then we had the election of Trump, knowing that they will never ever pay 1 cent in climate finance, which are grant-based, and even dropping out of the Paris Agreement. There was a big fear that Argentina might follow and drop out. That was solved in the last days of the COP, when Millet stated that he will actually stay in the Paris Agreement. So there was the geopolitical situation when we went there was pretty bad. And then we had like several crises, the war in Near East and in Russia were also certainly not creating the best atmosphere, especially not within the civil societies. So that's saying that. And the ask was for 1.3 trillion US dollar for mitigation and, sorry, also for adaptation and also for loss and damage. So it was not only for mitigation. 1.3 trillion US dollar is needed also for adaptation, because the needs with adaptations are up to 400 billion US dollar. And for loss and damage, it's the floor of 400 billion. It's estimated to go up to 900 billion US dollar. So this trillions, that is just a small amount that was meant actually for mitigation, because mitigation can clearly live also with loans. They don't need the grants because it's a business case. Adaptation, loss and damage is not a business case. It happens in the front line of climate change. It's not like an investment that you do that would attract other investors. And that is also something where I have to disagree with the German government. That was a failure not to integrate loss and damage into this process for political reasons, and it's the government, it's not the delegation, must say again. So, and in all industrialized countries who said clearly, no, in the Paris Agreement, we made sure it's only about mitigation, adaptation. We are not discussing loss and damage, even though there is a growing risk gap for loss and damage, and even though we did not keep our promises from Paris to keep global warming below, well below 2 degrees, and best at 1.5, because now the emission gap report says clearly that we are heading up to a world of 3 degrees. And then to argue it was not the mandate of the Paris Agreement to deliver also on loss and damage is actually very wrong and unfair if you don't take your part of your responsibility. So then we saw now the outcome. So it happened that there were no numbers on the table until the last moments. NCQG, that is the word for the new climate finance goal, was kept hostage for an ambitious mitigation package. I totally understand the strategy of the German delegation at that point. They wanted to see that first Saudi Arabia, China, other developing, high-emitting developing countries agree to an ambitious mitigation package, because before they come out with numbers, at least that counts for Europe, Team Europe, I say now Team Germany, because they wanted to see that the ambitions growing up there in a mitigation package. And I totally agree. It's really brutal that every year we have to renegotiate the mitigation package. It's not that it is like a normal thing, that's something that you have agreed in the last COP in this way in Dubai, transitioning away from fossil fuels, that 1 year later you have to renegotiate it again. So, but that put already a lot of time got lost to discuss what is important in the climate finance target. So only in the last days, like 2 days before the COP was meant to, or no, even not, it was 1 day before the COP ended, they came out with a concrete number, 250 billion. And then it was not clear how this money should be provided, grants or loans, what is counted into it. No definition. Basically, it was said everything. So it is also not painful for industrialized countries to hire the ambition from 250 to 300 if it's not clear how it is provided. In fact, you can also agree to 1.3 trillion US dollar because it was also not clear how it is provided and how this aspirational goal, it's only an aspirational goal. If you don't deliver on it, the language is clear that you don't have to deliver.
Minninger, I'm afraid I have to stop you here because we're running.
Okay, good. And then let me finish with one sentence.
Point very well. Sorry.
And my last sentence, and then I must say the failure was avoided by the role of Germany, because at the end they pushed for a little bit more ambition, but the failure was most of all avoided by the least developed countries and the small island development states, because they dropped everything that they wanted from this process. No allocation percentage for them. They have no guarantees if they get more grants than loans. They dropped loss and damage at the end. So for them, it was actually a disaster, but they did it because they want really to keep on this multilateral system. They believe in a multilateral system. And that's why we all agree that we have to continue and become better in the next years.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to have to to jump in, but I'm afraid we're really running out of time. Kira, please, your assessment.
Yeah, thank you. Because a lot of things have already been said, I'll keep my remarks short. And just to follow up on what Sabine Minninger just mentioned, I think the agreement also is testament to the fact that the effects of climate change are becoming so devastating that people are holding on to the small ropes that this multilateral process is offering them. So I think, yes, it is the belief in the multilateral process, but it's also the realization that whatever we can get in terms of help for mitigation and adaptation is worth fighting for, even if it does not meet the demands. Given the lack of the leadership of the COP presidency of Azerbaijan, I think it's actually almost close to a miracle that there was still this agreement at the end. And I also agree with Sabine with the assessment that this was also a large success of the German delegation, the efforts of Annalena Baerbock, of the State Minister Lührmann and State Secretary Morgan, who have laid the groundwork, and especially Minister Baerbock, who then, with her presence in the last days as one of the highest political figures there, really pushed for a compromise in the end. On the mitigation side, I agree. It's really a problem that things have to be renegotiated. That the strong language that was or stronger language. I mean, transitioning away is not really strong language. If you negotiate 30 years about emissions reduction, transitioning away from fossil fuels was blocked by Saudi Arabia, had to be renegotiated. But however, the previous agreements hold, of course, and it's about implementation and not only about reiterating what has been said already. Of course, this would be a minimum. We would need actually stronger language emerging from each COP. But apparently, this is not to be done with Saudi Arabia and other petrostates of the like. On the carbon markets agreement that was kind of pushed through in the very first days of the Article 6, I think it's good that it's finally agreed upon, but the way it was done was not helpful to the process. And it's now very key that the supervisory board that will supervise how the design of this, what the safeguards are, what the standards are in the carbon markets, now really includes more language on human rights, more consultations with indigenous populations, because there is a risk of people being displaced from their lands, from their indigenous territories, because these lands are declared carbon sinks, and then this is used as a prompt to clear the land of people who have lived there for many hundreds of years. So I think on human rights, the COP fell short. On the financing, a lot has been said. The finance goal is to triple. This should be achieved soon. We should not kind of slowly approach it again as we have with the 100 billion goal, but rather really forcefully now open the financing mechanisms and also pressure China petrostates to pay into this fund, continue pressuring this also in other fora, so that this is not only on German shoulders, but also on other countries. And then also force the US on the subnational level to contribute more. So I'm thinking in particular of certain states like California, like New York, but also of large philanthropies who should keep up the effort after the US has derailed this process for the third time, the first being Kyoto non-ratification, second time being Trump trying to exit the Paris Agreement, and then the third is now the next exit that will probably come within a year or so. So my resume is mixed. I think it's good that there was an agreement. It's one of the few multilateral processes that still works. And I really do think that we need to improve this and already lay the groundwork for the COP in Berlin. And here I would also ask the German government, in whatever constellation, to already put out an ambitious plan, as Sabine said, 6 months ahead, and not come without a plan to a COP. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kira. And maybe, Anna Lührmann, would you like to respond to a few points raised by Sabine Minninger, as the issue was sort of quite critical in parts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, there's it's clear that the first days of COP, it was a few days after the traffic light coalition ended, and yeah, we got a lot of questions. And sure, it would have been better to go there with a stable government. That's, I mean, one of the reasons why I was so shocked when Lindner and Scholz decided to break up this government on the day that President Trump was elected. But that's what we had to deal with, and I think we after a few days we could reassure all parties that we are there with a full delegation, with a clear mandate to negotiate. Then also with Minister Baerbock's presence until the end, I think we were able to play a very constructive role there, and particularly also Jennifer Morgan with all her the trust she has in all parts of the world, being able to build so many bridges. I think that was really very, very helpful for in the end the point of reaching an agreement. When it comes to climate finance, I think it was here, yes, more and more concrete is always better. But I think we are very much on track towards our commitment of the 6 billion. And this is something that we've said. It doesn't really help that we have that we had to stop the budget negotiations now for next year. But I think here we have still the opportunity to achieve this target that multiple governments and chancellors have committed to. And again, here, when it comes to the sort of the old goal of the 100 billion, Here we have laid out very clearly how we made our contributions to it. Again, it would have been better if the timelines and targets would have been achieved in the last years. But I think now we're here on track, and we played a very constructive role now in the negotiation of this financial goal, of the new financial goal. And and it's clear that particularly looking at the devastating effects that we're already seeing of the climate crisis, that the amount of money that is being pledged now is clearly not enough. But given the political realities, I think we are making good steps, and we had some additional agreements on loss and damage now also at COP. The fund was rendered fully operational. Additional pledges were made for the loss and damage fund. Again, it's not enough, particularly looking at the horrific effects that we've seen in the Philippines, for instance, 4 typhoons in just a few weeks. I mean, it's really devastating what we're seeing already. But given the political realities, I think we've done what we could with them.
Thank you very much. Sabine Minninger, you wanted to respond to that as well? And then we've got already 2 comments in the chat, which I would like to bring to you. But Sabine Minninger first, please.
Yes, I mean, I really would like to mention that we need to look forward now. So this target, this aspirational target of 1.3 trillion US dollar is something that is absolutely doable, and the money is there if we spend it in the right way. So the households, the federal budgets, they won't do it. We have to approach new innovative finance sources according to the polluter pays principle. So that means also that we have to tax billionaires, private jets, first class air tickets, shipping aviation is not touched so far, as much as the fossil fuel industry themselves. That is where the money has to come from. Also Germany, we are paying 65 billion euro a year in fossil fuel subsidies. That is, in a world of climate change, actually not to imagine that we are doing this. And every cent that we are spending now in countries rehabilitating after an extreme weather event or dealing with slow onsets event, that is what loss and damage money is something that we are avoiding and dealing with conflicts and conflicted or armed conflicts, and fighting for scarce resources. And we see that the sooner people get back on their feet, and they don't have to move, that also avoids displacement and migration in an unwanted way, where it's dangerous for the people themselves who are impacted, and also puts a higher burden on total refugees numbers, because these people don't want to leave. It's their home, they want to stay there, and it needs to be inhabitable. And one question here of the BMZ funding. So Germany, together, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the BMZ, they always bring in pledges in this process. One, for example, is a very small pledge for Germany, but highly important. It's that Germany is always pledging. In that case, I think it is the BMZ in the adaptation fund, and that's a small fund that especially African countries, the least developed countries, really favor. It's small money, but the quality of the climate finance is highly effective. So that is something that I would like to mention again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are more questions coming in, but can I encourage you to put the question in person to the panel? That's always much makes for a better discussion, and it helps me also not to misunderstand the questions being posed in the chat. But the one I wanted to give to the whole panel maybe is the second one by Samantha Mathieu, who earlier asked what is this constructive role Germany should be playing in the future? How could we flesh it out? Anna Lührmann has already given some pointers, but maybe Kira, you want to react to that?
Yeah, maybe just a few points. I mean, one is the question of finance, of course. I mean, Germany is the biggest polluter in Europe and has large historical emissions, therefore also has caused significant transboundary damage in other countries, and therefore should also, and is a strong economy. I mean, we are facing challenges, but compared to many other states, we are a very strong economy that can also contribute to the climate finance more. So I see this as one element. Then on the European level, playing a constructive role for a more ambitious nationally determined contribution NDC plan ahead of the next COP. And also not only putting forward new goals, but also implementing what has been pledged before. So Sabine mentioned fossil fuel subsidies. This is actually a G7 agreement already years old that these subsidies should be cut. But this has not happened in a significant manner. Yeah? So especially if you include in subsidies, for example, the diesel tax rebate, these are huge amounts that we are spending on sort of promoting fossil fuel use. And I understand it's very politically difficult to just snip, snap, cut it off. But I think if we make a clear plan of kind of phasing out this subsidy and announce this, then there will be more understanding in the public that we need to kind of divert these funds into a different direction. And so kind of implementing what you preach, right? So we need to also be able, I mean, I was approached multiple times in the COP, and maybe you were too, by people from other countries who are like, hey, your mobility sector is not performing well on their emissions targets. So these are things that other countries are also reading in the newspapers, and that also undermine our legitimacy when we act on a global stage. Yeah, they know that we are not meeting all of our goals, and I think this is very important that Germany continues to adhere to its promises, meets these promises, and therefore can also position itself in the global economy as a leader on some of these issues. I mean, do we want to leave the entire EV market to China? Probably not, right? So maybe we should step it up and also invest in areas where we think these will be future technologies where Germany can also contribute.
Thank you very much. Anna Lührmann, Germany's role.
Yes, indeed. And future technologies, I had a very good conversation with German industries at COP, for instance, Heidelberg Cement and others. So I think that's another important role for Germany to make sure how, particularly in these sectors like steel, like cement, we can contribute to carbon neutrality, the technological development, the strengths also of German industry here, if you wish, and contributing maybe also with this climate club to a reduction of this carbon leakage problem, right? I think that's one. Another important issue is that I think we're really perceived as a credible broker also by these most affected countries now, because we're really working as well towards an achievement of this mitigation, of our mitigation aims, as well as we prioritize the issue of the international climate agreements and the reduction of carbon emissions in our political agenda, as just seen also through the presence of Annalena Baerbock. So I think that's something that is being seen, and I really hope that there will be continuity of this also in the future. And as Kira just said, I think we still have a lot of things that we need to do domestically as well. The reduction of fossil subsidies, the decarbonization of the mobility sector, heating sector. I think there's still a lot more that we need to be doing, but that's maybe an issue that is more for the campaign times now.
Thank you very much. Another question, of course, is the financial question, sort of what kind of fiscal policy you want to pursue in a time of crisis. political or geopolitical rather, but also climate, of course. But I leave that out because I think we already discussed the breaking apart of the government and what immediate impact it has for COP. But as you say, maybe best left now for the campaign. Sabine Minninger, you wanted to come in on that as well, and then we have another.
Yeah, I would like to answer one question that was asked, and it's because a lot of people just also like people that I think are fantastic came up now. Do we still need COPs? So it's mentioned now Mujib Latif, but it was also the former Secretary General of the UNFCCC, Cristina Figueres, who asked that question, and that's very worrying. We need this multilateral process. It's a global problem that we can only solve on a global level. And it's the poorest and the most vulnerable countries, small island states and least developed countries who have no other platform to be heard. And why would rich countries or emerging economies listen to them? It's because they enjoy the sympathy of the world media. So if they are not going to such a platform, they will not be heard, and there won't be any will for political change. I mean, it is because Tuvalu is drowning in the South Pacific. It's because they say, it's our survival. That's why we are coming here. It's not about numbers or politics and tactics. It's a matter of survival. And that is the only platform they will be heard on the same level, and also the only table they can sit and negotiate and have the same right to speak up and also block, for example, certain deals. We see, of course, they don't have the same power. That's what we saw now out of this process here again. So the homework for rich countries have to be done back home. And while we see, I think for mitigation, once we don't need these negotiations anymore, because we see the fossil fuel industry is fighting for their survival because the economic argument is stronger now. It's just not something that is favorable anymore for investors. It's the renewables who are more lucrative and important. But for climate finance, no matter for the survival of the poorest, we still need negotiations on adaptation and loss and damage. And that is something that is not in favor for rich countries to pay up for. And that's what we have seen here again. So if you want to live in a world of solidarity, of peace and stability, then you also have to invest in this. And therefore, we need this platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is exactly the question I wanted to address next by Monika Griefahn. Sort of, does COP still work? I think it's probably another way of putting it. And sort of, would there be imaginable a different kind of format which could achieve the same thing? Kira, and then maybe another one again.
Yes, I would like to come in on this point as well, because I think these calls against the COP are also coming from a position of entitlement in the end, because I think it's exactly the most vulnerable who get a platform at this conferences. Azerbaijan was very weak in terms of civil society participation. Other COPs have been more prominent in this regard, simply because many organizations didn't receive sufficient accreditations and such. And there was heavy crackdown on civil society in Azerbaijan before the COP, and also not a very favorable environment for civil society engagement. Usually, there's also large protests in the cities where the COPs are, etc. And this was very reduced in Azerbaijan. So for the COP, it's as a political scientist, I would say it's a necessary but not sufficient condition to solve the climate crisis. You need this multilateral fora to engage with each other, to also explore new formats of cooperation. And the outcome of the COP is more than the documents and the agreements. Of course, this is the core piece, is what we're analyzing, what we're talking about. But, you know, many meetings happen on the sidelines. There's research projects being devised. There's civil societies that form over boundaries of states, over continents even. There are industry connections that are formed, etc. But I do think also there is room for reform. So the Club of Rome, they proposed some suggestions. I don't agree with everything, but I think especially kind of maybe reducing the number of fossil fuel lobbyists in the COP would serve the purpose, because we know from the Global Witness investigation that has occurred before the COP that the Azerbaijani presidency used the fora to also cut oil and other fossil fuel oil and gas deals as part of their conference. And the same has been coming out for the UAE COP in Dubai, right? So of course there are these counter movements that are undermining the legitimacy of the COPs. However, it is necessary to have them, but we also need other instruments. We need high ambition groups. We need to use G7, G20, maybe regional fora where there is more engagement. The European Union needs to strengthen their position once again. So there's many things to be done also in smaller groups, but this doesn't mean that the multilateral process is in vain.
Many thanks. Anna Lührmann, please.
Yeah, I mean, let's just imagine for a second the climate crisis would be something that would only threaten sort of your individual family, right? I mean, what would you do? You would probably try to sit down at the kitchen table in your living room to think about, okay, what can we do to prevent our house from being flooded in the coming years? And you would also, I mean, you wouldn't even dare to think sort of not to address the problem, right? Because it's something that that everyone then also needs to chime in. One person maybe needs to sort of build a dam around the house or something. It's called adaptation, right? One needs to clean up the mess that happened in the last storm, loss and damage a bit. And the others need to focus on the prevention of this happening again, right? Mitigation, and this is a sort of what we're trying to do in this global village at COP. That we're trying to sit there. We see this problem. We hear also. I mean, as I said already before, I found it really, I mean, really heartbreaking to hear sort of from all corners of the world, from the Arctic to the Himalayas to Europe to Latin America, this sort of different stories, but in the end, the bottom line was the same. The climate crisis is destroying our homes, our livelihood, our way of life, and kills people, right? So we need to come together to solve it, because I mean, as a politician, I'm discussing with voters, with people in Germany. I more than once hear this argument: okay, yes, yeah, maybe you're right, we need to do something, but what about China? What about the US, right? So we can only also convince Germans, I think, of doing ambitious climate action if we get everyone else on board as well. And how do you get everyone else on board? Yes, by leading by example, that would be a good idea, but also by sitting down and reaching fair agreements on how to distribute the burden, how to distribute also the benefits, the opportunities, the economic opportunities and all that, and the costs, which is called climate finance. So therefore, I think there's really, yes, of course, the process is not perfect. And actually, when I got off the plane in Frankfurt from Baku, my mom picked me up. I was super tired, and she was just like, so what's the point of these conferences? So, and I was just like, yeah, like we need to address this issue. And if we don't meet to talk about it, then it will, the global attention on it will even be less. And also this focal point of actually finding agreements, finding a fair share, and also seeing, and this is the hope that comes also with the transformation now, that we actually see all the businesses that are around, all these new ways of dealing with resources, of using renewables. I mean, we had double as many investments in renewables last year globally as in fossils. So this transformation is happening, and by talking about it at a focal point like Baku, I think this is super important.
There have been a very great number of questions by Samantha Mathieu. I wonder whether you would want to put one of those in person to the panel. It's such a long list that I'm afraid we can't sort of even try to address them all. You started by making the point sort of whether it's this role model question again. Does Germany really have to reach a goal to reach? But I think if you go into that now, we're sort of getting a direction which probably leads us nowhere at the moment. So I would rather ask the panel for a final round to address this question of the US shadow hanging over the whole climate policy process now. It is a question we are asking ourselves in many other fields as well. But if the incoming second Trump administration sort of makes good of what it has promised, it would be sort of a complete reversal of what we've seen over the last 4 years. Can the international community deal with this, or what would be your recommendation of sort of how to deal with the United States, which is sort of saying goodbye to climate policy as we know it? Who wants to go first? Sabine Minninger, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, Trump is fighting for a business case that will no longer exist, and therefore I'm not worried about the global mitigation or about or let's say about expansion of renewable energies, because that will happen for economic reasons. But I'm very worried, of course, of the provision of taking responsibility for the damage to this atmosphere. So, and that means also climate justice and delivering climate finance in provision, not only in mobilizing. And the US also under the Biden administration was a very hard piece to deal with, and now in the last years. So they're of course better. No one is as bad as Trump now, but they were far better, and they stay in the diplomatic dialogue, but they were not really great in delivering on provision on climate finance. So that was always very bad, also under Obama. So the US never played a great role in that. And I talk about grants, provision, so not about loans and the role of the development banks. What I see now with the US is a big danger, which role they are taking now in development banks, such as the World Bank, where they are the biggest shareholder, so they can also decide in which direction the loans are going, and if it's really for the expansion of renewables or for other investments. That is a very crucial part that they are playing there, a very bad role where we all have to be very cautious about. I'm not sure. I must say it's better that they all stand in the process. Yeah, but in Trump's case, I must say maybe it's really better that he's leaving than blocking any process here. And we need now forefront runners who are dealing and who lead by example. And that is the role of the European Union. That's the role of Germany. And whoever wants to become Chancellor of Germany has to be a climate chancellor. And that for all reasons. The first one is because if we want to be like on the top of world leading economy, then we have to invest in renewables worldwide. That we are not losing our own economic opportunities. And the second is, if you avoid more crises, more wars, more military interventions, then spend now every cent in mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. That's the cheapest thing that we can do.
Thank you very much. Anna Lührmann?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the statistics here of the day is that for every euro that we invest now in mitigation, we can save 6 euros of loss and damage spending later. So 1 to 6. I mean, the investment case here is very clear. And many people in the US do this calculation as well. Also, the Chinese government is doing that. I think that's one of the reasons why they're getting quite engaged actually now in climate policy, because they see also how important a stable climate is for also political stability. Because if we have food insecurity, rising food prices, then we really have a problem for also political stability, and of course for the safety of human beings. And I think here in Germany we also need to talk more about that, how already now food prices and the climate crisis is related to each other. So I think when it comes to the US, here we have see a very strong network also of states, of cities, of businesses that want to continue addressing the climate crisis and using the investment opportunities here. So I think this is something that we need to work with. We have also, of course, started to forge also relations with the incoming US administration, and we will see that we use it to the best ability possible. But it's very clear also, and therefore I think Baku is also a sign of hope, despite of all the issues, all the problems, also the whole attempt of renegotiating agreed language on fossils and all of that. In the end, we were able as world to stay course, to keep the course, and I think that's also an important sign for January.
Thank you very much. And Kira, you've got the last word.
Thank you, Henning. Yeah, on the question of the US, I mean, I also would not overestimate the previous leadership role of the US. I mean, admittedly, they give like the best speeches, but who really brought things to the table was countries like Germany, yeah, on finance, on phase out plans, etc. So of course, the Biden administration had a strong domestic plan for mitigation. Now the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, providing subsidies for green technologies. And I think this will largely stay in place because it benefits also a lot of Republican states. Maybe it will be reduced a little bit, but I think by and large, they will keep this in place because it benefits many of the manufacturing belt. Actually, I expect the Republicans to sort of reap the benefits, the political benefits from this Biden administration policy. So they will continue to expand their renewable base. They will continue also probably to reduce their emissions, but at a slower pace, because of course Trump will work to uplift the fossil fuel industry, to pump subsidies in there. This is overall in the medium and long term bad for the American economy because they're giving more room for China in the world market. This I see as a problem, but I think there may be some imitators like Millet who has called back its delegation from this COP in Azerbaijan, albeit this is not an exit from the whole process, but it's just a sign of these populist governments acting up on the international stage. I want to bring in one last element to this conversation, because I did like really this calculation Anna Lührmann presented on €1 spent on prevention, on mitigation can save significant amounts, €6 or whatever, and loss and damage. But I also want to kind of add a side on this one, which is of course the non-economic loss and damages. So these of course cannot be calculated because what if a culture ceases to exist? You know, traditional livelihoods in the Sahel are threatened in the low-lying island states, small island states. What if people are displaced from their homes, children are taken out of school? How do you calculate that? That is nothing to be calculated economically. This is trauma, this is loss, this is people dying in storms. What if your child dies in a storm? I visited people in Bangladesh where their children had perished in storms and they had to bury them under very difficult conditions in a hurry because they themselves had to flee. Yeah, so these are all the losses that we are confronting. And if we do not manage to mitigate adequately, then the entire tropical belt may be rendered uninhabitable just because of heat extremes. So we are really in a dangerous situation. And so I really call for everybody who has some ability to act on this, may it be in your office, may it be as a civil society member, may it be politically, to really take action now, because it will soon be too late to do so.
And with that, I bring the morning briefing to a close. Please join me in thanking our three panelists, Anna Lührmann, Sabine Minninger, and Kira Finke. Thank you all for attending this morning. And the next morning briefing is already next Thursday, where we will be discussing Ukraine. So please join us then. But for now, I wish you all a very good morning, and apologies again for the improvised appearance on my part. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.